My overarching question for this segment is, have the Nuggets shown us something different in the Clippers and the Kings games? They win the Clippers game 120-98. That was a blowout win. And the Kings game 130-129. That had the potential to be a blowout, and then it wasn't.
Yeah.
Before we get into the actual details of the games, how did you feel about the last two games, just kind of overall, and what you saw from the team?
I mean, the Clippers win was definitely more reassuring just because we had been getting smoked by the Clippers all the time. And,
True.
that was a game where Jokic didn't have to do as much as he's usually been doing. I think in both games it
Yeah,
was a
I
little
thought
bit like
Jokic
that.
was. That's a good point. These were probably the two worst Jokic games of the year offensively.
Well, yes, in the Kings game he had 5 turnovers, so that was like his biggest point of
He was so like he was struggling to score on Sabonis though.
yeah.
Like it wasn't just the turnovers.
Right, but I think that was the biggest glaring thing for me.
Yeah. Okay, so in the Clippers game, I think that was a really great defensive game from the whole team, to be completely honest. I saw there were a lot of people that were really annoyed because the starters got off to a really hot start, just defending really well, getting out and running, and just like scoring on them in transition. I mean, I'll just kind of like go over like my quick game summary. They were really good at the point of attack throughout the whole game. I think they had a good game plan against James Harden. It's tough with the POA that we have, but they were playing a lot of drop. And I thought Jamal in particular was actually really active fighting over screens, and that was good. And when it was Christian, he was getting bumped off of the screen, but he was doing a better job of chasing. He wasn't able to like recover back in front of the ball handler, but he was chasing and able to kind of bother the dribble. Like he and Jokic in concert kind of working together to bother the dribble of like James Harden in particular, and either force turnovers or force them into like a tough contested floater instead of being able to get off like an easy lob. And it was the same coverage they used. And when I say they, not just the team, but I thought that Jokic and Christian in particular figured out a better kind of defensive chemistry in that coverage. And I saw it executed really well in the Jazz game. And yeah, it's like the Jazz, like they suck, right? So I was curious to see what it would look like against better ball handlers, but I thought they executed well in that last game against the Jazz, where Jokic was playing a lot of drop, but he was very active in the drop. And even though it was a deep drop, so guy comes off of the screen, in this case, it's James Harden. Jokic is all the way in the paint, making sure that Zubac isn't available to get a lob on the roll. But once the guy comes into the paint, you've got Christian pressuring from behind and pressuring the dribble from behind in particular, and Jokic also able to, while not giving up the lob, able to disrupt the dribble enough to make them either the ball handler either pick it up and like pass it, like often contested passes, because the Clippers turned the ball over a hell of a lot in this game, almost as much as the Nuggets did. And we'll talk about the offense. But I thought it was just a really smart game plan. I almost feel like, honestly, in the first half, they expended so much mental energy on defense that they got CTE and like couldn't execute anything offensively because they were just throwing the ball all over the place. And it was everyone. It was Jokic, it was Jamal, it was Russ. Right.
Yeah, like
in the second half. Yeah. And in the second half, the defense continued and they just stopped turning the ball over. And that was the difference.
Yeah.
In the two halves of that game. And then it turned into a blowout.
James Harden had 9 turnovers. I thought that was probably the story of the game and why the Clippers probably lost. And it was both units. And like you described with Christian and Jokic covering screens with James Harden. I mean, Russ and DeAndre Jordan were kind of doing the same, where Russ was staying attached and getting steals from behind on James Harden. And even with James Harden in the post with Jamal Murray, Zubac is in the dunker. And
I know the exact play you're thinking of, and Jokic came over and was able to kind of bother that pass too. Because I think Harden. It was interesting. Harden was kind of passive in this game. Like he was looking to make the pass, and he's like, "Oh, Jokic is coming over and help. I'm going to try to create the passing angle to Zubac." But it's different when Jokic is doing that than when Harden is doing that, just because he doesn't have the height to kind of get it over the contest, and so that turned into a turnover too.
Also, I think guards, they always try to push it into the restricted area. Whether this was like a post up move, but if you're trying to drive in, you should go when the big's getting out of the paint, when, the 3 seconds is
Yeah.
coming up. He went in right when Jokic was entering the paint. So it was good timing by Jokic and or bad timing by Harden. I don't know if he saw that, but then, yeah, he couldn't get the pass off. So, yeah, it was just, I think even Jokic got his hand on a couple pocket passes potentially that went wild with James Harden. So,
Right, because he wasn't just playing drop. There were also times when he was playing like way up on the screens and reading the pocket pass as well. In particular, when it was like Norm Powell as a ball handler. But I think it was a couple of times with Harden too. Like they were just kind of mixing up the coverages a little bit, even though they played drop for the most part.
Which is, I think, a big storyline for the Nuggets defense right now, and how maybe they're not mixing up coverages as much, but at least willing to not just do the same one all the time, by playing up to touch with Jokic, and maybe being willing to try drop more. Ideally, you'd want to use the right coverage for certain situations, but it's very hard to do that in the regular season all the time. It's easier to do in playoff settings when you know the team that you're playing against and which players you want to do certain coverages with, because you're just going to get probably confused on certain situations where a player has the ball, and, on certain situations you're supposed to play up to touch, and on others you're supposed to drop. It's easier to miscommunicate, or a player to forget which situation. It's just hard to be that consistent, especially with this many games. But before we get to Kings, what'd you see with the Nuggets offense against the Clippers?
Oh my gosh. Well, the Nuggets turned the ball over 14 times in the first half of that game. So they actually went up pretty big in the first stint with the starters, and the stagger units with Jokic to close the first quarter actually extended that lead as well. It started a little bit with the bench unit, who was playing okay, but Russ had some really bad turnovers in that stretch. Actually, in that game, I had a note here. Russ was the first sub for Christian in that game, which is that's a change. I don't know if it happened in the Hawks game. I wasn't paying attention to it as much, so maybe it's a change from before the Wizards game or something. But previously, the first sub was either Russ for Jamal or Julian for MPJ, or both at the same time. Mm-hmm. So Russ for CB was definitely a change in that game. And like I said, the starters and all the staggers with Jokic through that first quarter were kind of cooking, and were able to, get stops, run, do all the good things that we like to see, right? But it shows that they're still tinkering with the rotation. The thing that this did impact, though, is that Malone was still playing Russ and Jamal on the bench together. And when I say still, I mean kind of going back to that, because we've talked a lot about why has Malone kept going back to Russ on the bench by himself as the sole lead ball handler, even though in the past he would do something different. But it seems like he's kind of gone back to what we've been what I've been wanting. I don't know if you actually subscribe to that as well, but the numbers bear out that Russ when Jokic is off the floor, Russ is better with Jamal there. So that happened, but at the end of kind of the bench stint, when Jokic comes back in the second quarter, both the guards went out of the game. And so we got some no point guard looks for a little bit. It was literally just a few possessions, because Julian was on the floor, and it was 2 possessions. They struggled to score. It almost had nothing to do with the fact they had no point guard out there, because I don't think that they were actually trying to do Julian at point. I think they were just let's try posting Jokic up. Let's try posting AG up, whatever, instead of ball in Julian's hands, for example. They struggled to score, and then they gave up some transition buckets on the other end. And then after the second time, because I think Harden scores on Julian isolation. I thought Julian's defense was fine. It was just Harden made a tough shot. It kind of looked like it might have been short, might rattle out, but then it fell in, right? And then I think Malone pulls Julian, puts Peyton back in for him. And then you're okay, we're still no point guard, but now the spacing is even worse. They proceed to, turn the ball over 2 or 3 more times before Malone puts Jamal back in. And then they were able to, I wouldn't say they closed the half strong, but they were able to keep the lead, right? They lose it later in the second half, but then they regain it and obviously blow them out. So I thought that was interesting in the way that particular rotation somehow led Malone to a point when there was no point guard on the floor. In the second half, he didn't do that. He didn't do that rotation. And obviously the starters didn't even have to play the fourth quarter, so we didn't even have to see what that would look like. But Malone, almost in anticipation of it, like preempted even that and didn't sub Russ for CB in the second half. That was interesting. He subbed in for Jamal, so he wanted to keep one of those guys on the floor at all times in the second half. And obviously, because we blew them out and Stars didn't have to play the fourth quarter, Jamal played some of it just in those stagger bench minutes, but then sat the last 6 minutes or so of the game. It was clear that Malone didn't want to go back to that look again because of how much of a disaster it was, particularly against the Clippers. And it's not like I would have predicted that it would be a disaster against the Clippers, but it kind of makes sense because of how heavy a ball pressure team they are. But it's also not like they had or Julian playing point and he was turning the ball over. It was just I don't think that these guys who were on the floor knew what they wanted to do with each other, honestly. And then the Clippers kind of got some stops. They were just able to get some stops out of that and then get out in transition.
How did that contrast to the Kings game? Because CB was out and, we started Russ
CB
with Jamal.
Out, yeah.
So what were the rotations like with those two starting together and having
that's a really good point. I don't think that we ever had a point where one of them was not on the floor.
It kind of felt like that, but I don't recall.
I don't recall. I need to go back to Ryan Blackburn's rotations from that game, but I at least don't recall thinking while watching the game. And I had to watch the Kings game after the fact because I missed most of it live. I did catch the last part, but there wasn't a point when I was watching where I was thinking these offensive issues that they're having is because of the fact that there's no point. I think there was a point guard on the floor at all times in the Kings game as well.
Yeah, it was Russ and Jamal were on the court the whole game.
So clearly Malone was we're not messing around with that again, and I'm I kind of don't blame him because it was a major disaster in the first half of that Clippers game.
It's interesting.
And again, I think it was just because they never play together. Lineup the lineup was literally Jokic, AG, MPJ, Christian, Peyton, or Christian and Julian. And actually, the only time we've seen the no point guard looks is when AG was out. That's another kind of interesting dynamic in this because obviously AG changes the geometry of the floor in that way as well. It was such a brief stint that I'm going to be honest about this. You can't really take anything from it about the no point guard looks except what Malone's reaction to it was, which was not good. The other thing about the offense, just overall, this was true with or without a point guard on the floor in the first half. The Clippers do force turnovers, but I thought that the Nuggets were incredibly sloppy with how they were moving the ball in that game. And again, I did think that a lot of people were upset while watching the game in that first half because they were blowing this lead and they were being dumb on offense and then having trouble guarding runouts, but I thought they were putting so much energy and effort in and executing. They were knowing their personnel. They were leaving the right guys open from three. It was Chris Dunn and Mo Bamba and not Norm Powell. I actually thought defensively they were putting in so much effort. Mentally, they just needed to calm down a little bit. And that's what happened in the second half. But some of the major turnovers that happened, I thought were the kind that the Clippers can force because of how they were guarding them. There was one where Russ is and he had 5 turnovers this game. It was not, his shining moment until really that fourth quarter when he was just cooking. And he was great defensively in that game. I really think the whole team was. Mm-hmm. But Russ was forcing entry passes to Jokic, even when they were running pick and roll. Either Jokic gets a switch and he's trying to force an entry pass so that he can take advantage of that mismatch. The big is playing off of Russ. The small is also on Jokic. And then a third defender would also come in to try to make that pass difficult. And they did make that pass difficult so much so that Russ would turn the ball over. Instead of Russ recognizing that the guy in the corner is wide open because that third defender is being pulled in. And I don't think it was just Russ, to be fair. I think we've talked about this before. I think that Jokic is looking off shooters more than ever this year. I think Jamal's turnovers were just kind of weird. He's actually been one of the best assisted turnover guys on the entire team, if not the best. For the most part, he's actually done a pretty good job of finding guys. And I think Russ does a good job finding guys on the interior, but I don't think he's actually good at kick out passes, either seeing them or executing them, to be honest. And like I said, Jokic has been looking off guys, but definitely stood out to me because I think that that's how teams are going to guard us with Russ on the floor. there's a play that we're going to talk about in the Kings game where it's like in the clutch and Keon Ellis decides, probably against game plan, I think Keon rotates over to Russ and then Fox tries to go and like contest another shooter.
Both of them spread out to shooters and it was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
A little bit of a mistake there.
And that's the shot that we were going to be, that the Nuggets were going to be forced with, and above the break three from Russ, and he's not shooting well from above the break this season. And then Russ does the right thing and he makes the pass. He makes the entry pass to Jokic as soon as he sees that the passing lane is now, the angle is now open because Keon is no longer sagging way off of him and onto Jokic in the paint.
Yeah.
But the Clippers were like, no, we're not doing that. We're gonna rotate like way over. And I think that was a problem for the Nuggets. And they did it in the second half as well, but I think the Nuggets just got even more stops and stopped turning the ball over. They were just like making smarter passes, but it wasn't like it was always going to be easy to get Jokic the ball.
Yeah.
In particular, when it's Russ being played that far off of by his own defender, in addition to the two guys that are on Jokic on the backside, right? So I just think that we need to do a better job as a team of getting the ball to open shooters sometimes. And that's going to sacrifice some of the, like sometimes Russ makes these like high risk, high reward, like great entry passes to Jokic. That's just been happening this season. And it works because Jokic has suction cups for hands. But I think that good defense are going to be able to read that, know that from the scouting report. No, he's going to be forcing these passes. We just need to make sure that they don't get in there and we'll be fine. The other thing that the Clippers forced them into because of how they were covering the Jokic Russ 2-man game is giving Russ so much space that he had to try to score. Like, because that is the right play for like almost anybody else, but like I don't want Russ taking any shots.
Yeah.
If he can help it, unless he's like getting all the way to the rim, and he has been better about finishing his layups of late. So that's fine. But when he has to take a jump shot, it's like, even if it like wide open stuff from 15 feet, from 24 feet, it just like, it's like, I don't want to see that, but that's what teams are going to be able to force. And I think that really stood out. And that's, one of the reasons that you would be nervous about a playoff setting when it comes to the Nuggets. And if you're the front office, you're like, oh, we need another on-ball creator. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, you guys, like, just read my timeline. I've been saying this since before the offseason started. Or in particular, I was like, okay, if you're going to let KCP walk, this should be one of the things that you should be able to get somebody that can play in the playoffs. Not saying that Russ can't, but I am saying that some of the reasons that he might not be able to are starting to manifest.
Yeah.
Even though he's been great defensively, he's been great at getting Jokic the ball. I just worry that more and more of those passes are going to have to be those high risk passes. Even if he can make them, it's going to lead to, there's going to be some downside to that as well.
That's just the nature of Westbrook. Like you said it perfectly. He's going to have high risk, flashy passes, getting through tight windows. And there are times where he's consistently hitting them. And obviously sometimes they're going to lead to turnovers. And it's the same with the layups and the shots and all of his decision making. So, you covered that really well. But yeah, with Russ, let's move to the Kings game just because he started this game. And we started out incredibly hot.
Do you remember if it was the back or the quad?
It was a back strain.
It was the back. Yeah, back strain.
The Nuggets started out super hot in that game. You all know how it went. AG was dominating in the first quarter. He had like 15 points and just like sealing guys and getting cross matches and just taking it to DeMar DeRozan, who can't guard him because the Kings are playing him at power forward for some stupid reason. Anyways, it was great to see for AG. I thought, wow, the Nuggets are really, turning a corner. And just to go back to your rotation idea really quick was that I thought that might have been a takeaway from the Kings game is that Russ should be the first one to come in for CB because that lineup was playing so well. But I wasn't thinking like, you bringing up the no point guard look. So it's like how much,
Well, it's
how are you
clear from the Kings game then that it's possible to do both.
Even when starting them together. So it must be possible if you're bringing them off the bench. So I think that's something that they should look into for sure. Anyway, but just, first quarter was amazing. And then the second and third were not amazing. And where do you even want to begin with this Kings game? Because,
Yeah, do you want to talk about like what are the things you think they did right? Like the number one things that they did right in that first quarter?
I just thought, the Nuggets are always playing up to touch with Jokic. That's the thing with weak side, backside rotation help. And we've heard Matt Moore and people speculate that maybe we should play some drop with Jokic. We were doing that kind of at the beginning, which I was worried about just because DeMar DeRozan is a mid-range like specialist. I don't know how his stats are looking this season. The consistent theme of this game were people not being able to get around screens, and then the Kings pretty much just being able to take any shot they kind of wanted. But in the first quarter, they were just missing everything, and we were getting the ball and pushing it and getting in transition. I don't necessarily think we were really bothering them off the screen. We fouled them sometimes off the screen, and
I think Jokic was playing a drop, but then he'd kind of come up to contest. There was something they were doing more in the second half where they would bring in like heavy nail help along with Jokic contesting while the low man was keeping Domas from getting behind to score. Because I think that Sabonis had a great night, but most of his scoring came against the bench, not so much against the starters, and his scoring was off of pick and roll. And I think the way that they were playing their matchup zone it let the guards not go off because they didn't, but get to their spots a little bit easier. But it shut down the pick and roll game with the way that they were guarding. But that was more second half. In the first half, I don't really think that we were doing much defensively, and it caught up to them in a big way in that third quarter, especially in transition. Or that second quarter, I should say, but also the third.
Yeah, for Jokic not being an amazing rim protector, you never know how drop's going to work out. But, it is technically easier to play that in some regard just because, you're letting people take these shots that are prone to variance and they can miss and you can rebound. Jokic is closer to the rim in that case. And so you can have advantages. But then if people are hitting shots, you are also risking that. And that started to happen because the Kings were really cold in the first quarter and they got super hot throughout the rest of the game, and we were, giving open threes and not getting around screens. I think
it was more like transition was really bad. To be completely honest, I think they gave up 47 points in that second quarter.
Oh, God,
and I think the main issue was that they were not scoring. And I thought it was actually worse once the starters came back onto the floor. I think when Jokic came into the game, they were still up. It was either 13 or 16. The bench had kind of extended the lead, but then they started to lose it again. So Jokic came back in, and the offense completely changed, frankly. I think they got their lead because they were just letting AG bully DeMar DeRozan because Keegan Murray was out of this game, and they had nobody who could guard AG because they had to have Sabonis on Jokic. They just didn't have any other choice.
Yep.
And AG was bullying DeMar, and then they stopped going to that. They kind of stopped going to that the whole rest of the game, except for one possession where AG tried to post, not late, but late in the third quarter, post him up. And I think they got an offensive foul call, and they kind of just they didn't go to him at all between the second quarter and that point, but then didn't again the whole rest of the game. And I'm that's how you guys were. You should just be spamming this. But I was kind of wondering, to be honest, if they were just not wanting to hit that, spam that, they were trying to run their sets and run their offense, work through some other things. I think that was intentional, but it was annoying as a fan to watch. But I understand part of the rationale in going away from that. It is also a lot of work for AG, but he was sealing DeMar a lot of times too. And then kind of getting waved off, hey, get out of the paint. By Jamal or something. And then the Kings were doing a better job defending our guys on the perimeter until really late third quarter. They weren't actually defending our cuts that well. We scored 76 points in the paint in this game, and it's not because Jokic was dominating Sabonis. I can tell you that. Because he was having a miserable scoring game against Domas. He was mostly attacking mismatches.
And when they were on their run in those second and third quarters and, taking the lead back, we were wondering, why aren't we going to AG or why aren't we going to Mike? Just because the offense was not as potent as it was to start the game. Yeah. I think part of it is just not necessarily a sharp process. There were times where Malone just called timeouts with Jamal in the wing in the half court ready to run a play because he just saw the offense was not doing anything.
Jamal was on the wing, waiting for, nothing was happening. Nobody was moving. Was happening. And Malone was over it.
Yeah. So, but also the Kings played zone in that game, which is weird because you don't necessarily want to do that against Jokic. He's probably one of the best to defeat a zone of all, in the league.
I think that was also to try to protect DeMar a little bit too.
No, That was where I was going. Is like I think
Yeah.
that's partly why MPJ and AG didn't get more shots or attempts is just because of that
Yeah.
zone.
No, that's a good point.
Kind of
So like they
neutralize
kind of
them.
threw off the rhythm of it to get the Nuggets away from it, and then the Nuggets, like even when they had the opportunity, once the Kings stopped playing some zone, they didn't go back to it. So that was
Yeah.
interesting.
We played zone too, and that did seem to work in some senses of slowing the Kings down a bit. And what did you think of the zone and the defensive effort, like, and how that worked?
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the third quarter before I go to the
Okay,
fourth,
sure.
if that's okay. Just
Yeah.
really, I really wanted to shout out Russ for this
Okay.
because the body language was really bad after the Kings retook the lead in kind of the early third quarter. Like you said, there was a play. There were like consecutive timeouts happening because Malone was like, "You guys are running you're like not even running the offense." Jokic was having a miserable time trying to score on Sabonis. Like I thought Domas did a really good job given the amount of physicality that he was allowed to play with. It was very Bam-esque, where his whole job was to just like be up on Jokic and keep him from getting to his spots the whole time. Part of the reason that AG was able to eat so easily, and Domas isn't like the best rim protector or anything like that, but he has a big body and he can be a presence down there, but he couldn't be because Jokic was kind of like standing out there and Domas was like not dropping back at all. He was just like on him, making sure that he couldn't get to any spot easily. And when Jokic tried to post him up, it was miserable. But in the third quarter, Russ was doing literally everything he could to just kind of will them to stay in the game. And I thought that that was a really good illustration of what he's been bringing to the team. And the Kings were going on this massive extended run that continued on from that second quarter, right? And Golden One Center was getting really loud. And I talked about we did our rankings of the best home courts, and I said last year I would have said the Sacramento's number one, but they hadn't been, as like fired up as I remember them being, even in the playoffs against the Warriors in that series a couple of years ago. But in this game, like Golden One Center was on like hot fire while the Kings were going on this run. And for Russ to will the team back into the game with big plays in transition, he was just getting to the rim, ISOing guys and getting to the rim and like finishing at the rim, not just getting there, which was really great. There was a great, lob to AG when he drew some help in a pick and roll situation with Jokic, which is nice. Like it's nice to see Russ being able to make reads other than get ball to Jokic, which is part of what we were just talking about with the Clippers game. And then at the end of the third quarter, Jamal gets a good stop on Fox, and then he comes in with the bench and he's trying to make important plays. And again, a lot of this is like just getting back into the game because the Kings had retaken the lead at that point after the Nuggets had led by like 23 in that second quarter, right? And you talk about like, yeah, when Jokic is dropping back that much, you leave yourself vulnerable to jump shots. And Sabonis made like a couple of floaters. He made a couple of middies, but there was this big pick and pop three that he hit with 3 minutes left to give the Kings an 8-point lead. Again, with 3 minutes left in the clutch, they stopped going to Jokic in the post, which I was like, thank goodness, because this was just not working all game. Like Sabonis was really good in that matchup. It was very, like I said, kind of Bam-esque, except I think Jokic has an easier time against Bam in the post than Sabonis in the post, and maybe it would be different if Bam ever went against Jokic in a Mark Davis officiated game. But
oh, God, yeah.
In the clutch, it was a lot of Jamal. He had been in that fourth quarter before Jokic came back in, getting them back in the game, running pick and roll with DeAndre Jordan. In the early fourth quarter, missing shots, but he was generating really good shots out of pick and roll with DJ. Then Jokic comes back in. It's a lot more ball in the hands of Jamal. The Nuggets had gotten in the bonus, and so Jamal got some free throws on a drive when Sabonis fouls him. I don't remember if maybe he'd gotten a switch and was attacking that switch in isolation, which was interesting. There was another play where Jokic, I think, gets a switch in the post, draws a double, and then I think it was DeMar was on Russ, and maybe it was Fox misses him, and then Russ is able to cut right to the rim, and Jokic obviously makes that pass for a layup. And love to see Russ finishing layups. Like I said, it all feels like found money.
Yeah, it really does.
And obviously with CB out of this game, you have Russ closing again, and I always have questions about what it's going to look like with Russ closing with the starters. What the offense is going to look like in particular. Jokic he hit the big pick and pop three off a great drive from Jamal. There were actually multiple drives from Jamal, and obviously Russ has been driving really well in this game. But like I said, he's not the best at kicking out, except he'll usually hit Jokic on that pop. Jamal doesn't always hit Jokic on the pop, right? But he did, and he drew the big with him on this great drive. Like he got past his man, and Jokic obviously hits the three. It was his first made three of the game.
Yeah.
So he'd actually been bombing threes in this game. I think it's because he was tired of trying to battle Sabonis inside.
And they just like were a little bit rough looks. Like they weren't the easy ones where he was wide open. He was like, I'm going to take them.
I do think that the unique challenge of Sabonis, particularly when he's allowed as much physicality as he was inside in this game, but I think Jokic didn't handle that well, to be completely honest. But even on the outside, he's quick enough to recover to contest Jokic's shots on the outside. This particular one, I think Jamal did a really good job of drawing the help like really deep in before he kicked out to Jokic.
Yeah.
And so he had plenty of time to take and make that shot. And so that was big. But that's the difference. Like when we talk about Jokic's shooting, like the difference between a shooter and a non-shooter, not that Jokic is a non-shooter, but I wouldn't classify him as a shooter, is that they can hit the contested looks, semi-contested looks just as comfortably as the wide open ones.
Well, Jokic in 23 when we won the chip was hitting everything.
That's true. But, that was special. And then you want to talk about the last offensive possession of this game because it was just vintage stuff.
Man, yeah, it was just the two-man game again. And I mean, just to your point, Russ has been having success with Jokic in two-man game because he has that explosive ability to get around and really drive in to the defense and then get it to Jokic. Maybe not as good as the pick and pop and all that, but whatever. You know, Jamal had that, you just talked about that crazy over the head pass for the pick and pop, but I just thought Jamal was better and more shifty. And in that play, like it was multiple actions going back and forth to each other where it was getting covered up. And Jamal just hit a mid-range, 16-foot shot and just a tough shot maker. And so it's just another example after the ones you just listed of Jamal looking the way that we want him to look. And
I said earlier, like that early in the fourth quarter, he was missing some really good looks. He also made a few with the bench before Jokic came back in, because actually the Kings kind of went on a mini run after Jokic came back in, and then we had to come back again from that. But he hit two big threes. One of them crossing Fox up kind of around a DeAndre Jordan screen and getting wide open. It was very similar to when we did our Nuggets rewind of the Boston Celtics game. Very similar to the play where Jamal just kind of gets Tatum on kind of a hesitation right outside of the screen. And then it comes off the other side and then drains a wide open three that way. It was interesting to see him do it again with Fox. Fox can be a really good perimeter defender just because of how quick he is. And he's skinny enough to get around screens. And so when he's really engaged on that end, like it can be difficult to just shake him. Like he's not like, Caruso or anything, but he can be like kind of he can bother you. And Jamal was able to shake him. And it was interesting. There was one play in this game where I think Jamal was actually able to get by him entirely. Which is really tough because Fox is so quick and he's very laterally quick too. So just being able to get by him can be tough. Like you have to attack him in other ways most of the time, but Jamal was able to do that. And I just think that like we're starting to see signs physically of Jamal being closer to the shape that we need him in to make a deep playoff run. And hopefully to make a run in the regular season such that we can, get, home court advantage in a couple of rounds or something like that too. So I had a couple of questions just about the overall on the last two games. And the first one I have has to do with this Jokic and Sabonis matchup, because in both games, Jokic had like his two worst games of the season before and after Jokmas, right? And I just want to know, what do you think is like the most effective way for Jokic to attack Sabonis and Zubac? Because one-on-one in the post, I've seen that, especially the Zubac matchup, I've seen that just like over and over again, both this year and last year, that it's not easy for him. Like it's not the slam dunk that Nuggets fans would like it to be, or some would like to think it is.
It was consistent with Jokic and Murray where they were struggling in the mid portion of the game, and it's just a testament to both of them where even if you're struggling with tough matchups or you're just not having a good night, like you still have to find a way to score and try to find a way to win. And, Jokic was doing some tough one-on-ones with Sabonis and shooting over it. I think he's still going to have to go one-on-one and you're going to have to win some of them. I don't think that's the most viable strategy to do all the time.
Like, what should you think he should be like one-on-one in the post? Like, are there, do you think
one-on-one in the post,
have you seen,
being really physical, using his body, pushing him. It's versus Sabonis, maybe less so Zubac. I think it's harder. He's just bigger. I think, though, like probably the answer is just having a better and more consistent two-man game again. Like, you got to be a real threat as Jamal.
Some of that pressure.
You got to be, Jamal's got to get back. He's got to be a real threat to like open it up more for Jokic on pocket passes, or like he's got to be a threat to actually draw Sabonis over and such. Maybe they stick to Jokic like we've seen that with the Wolves where they're funneling, but it's not like the Kings have another dude they can just funnel to.
Exactly.
That'd be like my best guess. What are your thoughts on that?
I think so. We talked about this with the Wolf series, right? Obviously, Cat's out east now, and I think his worst worst matchups in the West are Zubac and Sabonis in terms of just like one-on-one in the post, like where his bread and butter. Out east, it's like Cat and like Wendell Carter Jr. and then Isaiah Stewart on the Pistons, which doesn't matter because it's the Pistons, right? Hopefully, he doesn't get traded to somebody in the West because I think that's a really annoying one. But when we talked about it before the Wolves series and during it, one of the things that was most effective with Cat, and I think it's like this is more applicable to Zubac, is like hitting Jokic on the move can be a lot more effective because even though those guys are big, they're not as fleet of foot as Jokic is. Even if you don't think that Jokic is very fleet of foot, but he can beat a lot of guys when he's got like a head of steam and he's already on the move. If he can, catch you off guard that way. But that requires like somebody like a Russ on your team who's going to always hit you on hit Jokic on those face cuts. And because he's constantly moving off the ball. I actually thought in this game versus the Kings, it was also true versus Sabonis that a lot of the ways that he was able to score is when he was able to be on the move. You talked about like Jamal being able to open some things up with the pocket pass and Jokic kind of diving on the roll and being able to attack Sabonis that way. But there were also some other kinds of off-ball cuts. When you think about it, a pick and roll when the big is rolling, that's just another example of an off-ball cut, basically, and like trying to catch somebody on the move and catch a defender off guard that way. But there were other off-ball cuts that Jokic was able to make. And then he was either scoring like a bucket on those or he was getting free throws when they hit him, even when Sabonis is guarding him. That's part of the reason that the most important thing that I think Sabonis did all night was stay attached to Jokic and didn't let him, he didn't get a lot of those opportunities throughout the game, but there were small pockets throughout the game where he was moving off ball, getting open that way. And Russ in particular, and even Jabal were like hitting him on the move. Even MPJ is able to do it sometimes when he's able to make that entry pass quick enough. But I think those guys are tough matchups. And I think that it's worth just kind of filing that away for, future reference. Okay, other question here. How can the Nuggets counter teams forcing the ball into Russ's hands, as we talked about when it came to that Clippers game? I already talked about this example here where Russ ends up passing up a three when Keon comes out to contest him and then just gets Jokic the ball anyway, right? But like we talked about, it's going to be difficult sometimes to do that when teams are like playing you for that pass. So he's either going to have to score or get the ball to somebody else. I like the idea of him getting the ball to somebody else more than him scoring, to be completely honest. And I think he's done a good job. Like I said, with these interior passes, not just when he's on the interior, but when MPJ is cutting, right? Or the lob to Aaron Gordon that he made in the Kings game during that third quarter run where he's run pick and roll with Jokic and everyone's converging on him. And then he draws DeMar in help and then is able to get the lob to AG. But I think he's also got to work on some kickouts to shooters. And I don't know if he's going to when I say he's got to work on it, I need to see it. Like, he's 36, and I don't know how much his game is actually going to change, but I need to see if he's able to make that pass consistently. It's not that he never kicks out, it's that he kind of waits until the last possible second to kick out. He's always looking for like every other option before he does that. And so that's just something I'm keeping in the back of my head. There was also a play in the Clippers game where Jamal, there were a lot of plays in the Clippers game in the second half, especially where Jamal is the one running pick and roll and Russ is operating off ball, which is like, that's a whole can of worms that you can open. But there's this play where it ends up with Jamal runs pick and roll with DJ. 3 defenders, they try to guard that 3-on-2. Russ is kind of running around the perimeter. It's almost like he's running off a pin down on the opposite wing, and Jamal is able to do almost like a cross court pass to Russ to basically just reverse the ball to the other side of the floor. But Russ is like attacking off the catch now instead of just stand still, like ready to shoot. So the defender's not paying attention to him at all because he was kind of the third guy that was in guarding the pick and roll with Jamal and DJ. So Russ is able to run in, and this didn't count as an assist for Jamal, but because Russ then tries to lob it into DJ, but it hits the bottom of the rim. But Russ gets the offensive rebound, and then yeah. But I think it would have been a really interesting. I still think it's an interesting idea to just have Russ like just be on the move more, because if you get that ball when you're on the move, they won't be able to make you shoot because you're going to be able to just attack off the drive. And then the question is more like, is he going to be able to finish at the rim? And I don't know, but he's been finishing at the rim a little bit more now, and that's been good. And even if he isn't, he's probably going to be able to draw help and make some kind of interior, just like a shovel pass to the big or whoever. So I think that's one interesting way that I didn't expect to see from Russ. But it's one way that these like Jamal Russ bench units have been able to operate a little bit, is with the two of them kind of trading off ball handling duties, but keeping the other one involved in the action. It's not just kind of going 1-on-1 or I'm running pick and roll and you're just like off being a spacer. Even though like sometimes that is Jamal, and that's like the best thing for Jamal because he is the better shooter of the two.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost treat it like a zone in a way where, I mean, if he's being played off of, like forcing the ball in his hands, he can attack that gap a little bit, try to draw any help he can, and then just either swing it or, you've talked about him trying to kick out to shooters. That's going to have to improve. I also think of like ways that we've done it with Aaron Gordon when he's been left with the ball, which is like run a little DHO or something. Obviously, he's not a big guy. I'd assume if he was playing with AG, for example, he may not be being stayed home on the 3 on the perimeter, whether he's on the weak side or not. Could try to skip past to him or something and then run some kind of action with him and MPJ or anything like that.
But they've been playing so fast, like their offensive possession length is like, it's not just the pace of the team. Sometimes pace is like, oh, their defense has just been bad, which it has been. But also their offensive possession, they're like 5th in offensive possession length this season. So I think they're not very methodical at the moment.
I guess I'm thinking I'm more concerned about this for playoffs and such.
I agree with you, and I'm citing this as like a concern.
I know it's hard. It's a tough one. It may not be something we can overcome. It may be like something that's just a weakness, but we'll see how Russ plays out of it and what problems he solves.
Okay, so last thing, I just wanted to address the fact that DeAndre Jordan has become the de facto backup center, at least for now. I don't know how if that's going to change as the schedule becomes more dense, because they've basically been playing they played like 4 games in the last 2 weeks, and he's been playing backup center. My number one concern with this is, and will continue to be, that DeAndre Jordan's going to wear down, and then the play is going to be diminished. But for now, like, he's defensive rebounding, and that's been good. And he's just running pick and roll with both, operating in pick and roll with Jamal and Russ, and just kind of giving them an offensive option off the bench. Like, the bench has been able to score because DJ screens and rolls.
Yeah.
And even like there are a couple of possessions where he's like running DHOs with Julian. Julian hits like a really tough 3. This was in the Kings game off of DHO from DJ, and it was like off a broken play. I think Peyton gets DJ the ball back after maybe an offensive rebound, and DJ is like, okay, let me like get this Julian, set him a little screen, and Julian hits like a tough semi-contested three there, you can run kind of coherent basketball when you have a real center on the floor who can screen and rebound. I think he's got the best defensive rebounding percentage on the team by far.
I love that obviously he's not the position or player that we want necessarily long term, and even this season and whatever into the playoffs. Just because there's a ton of concerns and he's older and such. But I love that he's like doing well for now and serviceable, and it's an option to at least go to. And Russ is more familiar with him as a type of rolling big than Šarić, who I don't know what synergy they've even developed, if they've developed any or not, because they've not played together very much. So if that's what we have to do for now, I mean, I said it on Twitter before. I was like, why don't we just play DJ more? Like, why not? Listeners, thank you so much for spending the time and hanging out with us. If you haven't subscribed and you're watching this and you liked what you saw, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing so you don't miss future shows. And the clip channel where we'll upload clips and snippets from the show. Remember, winning is fun and losing always sucks.
Sure does. Winning is awesome.